spreadsheet. Reform must be about institutions that reflect today's world. 1945 problem solving will not solve 2026 problems. If structures do not reflect our times, our world, our realities, they will lose legitimacy. Consider the facts. Every day, the share of global GDP held by developed countries shrinks bit by bit. Every day, emerging economies grow in size, in strength, in influence. Every day, South-South trade pulls further ahead of North-North trade. Our structures must reflect this changing world. And that is why reforming international financial and trade institutions is not just important, it is essential. And the same goes for the Security Council. And I would add that it is manifestly in the interest of those who hold the most power to be on the front lines of reform. Those who try to cling to privilege today risk paying the price tomorrow. And so we must all be bold enough to change. The world is not waiting, neither should we. Excellencies, as we push forward on reforms, our larger mission must be finding our bearings in the disorienting world. Let me boil it down to three principles that must be at the foundation of all our actions, not just for this year, but for our times. First, we must adhere to the UN Charter fully and faithfully. No ifs, no ands, no buts. The Charter is a compact which binds us all. It's not a la carte menu, it's prefix. The Charter is the foundation of international relations, the bedrock of peace, sustainable development, and human rights. I'm honored to serve as custodian of the Charter, but each one of you has signed up to be a custodian of the Charter too. When leaders run roughshod over international law, when they pick and choose which rules to follow, they are not only undermining global order, they are setting a perilous precedent. And let's be clear, the erosion of international law is not happening in the shadows. It's unfolding before the eyes of the world, on our screens, live in 4K. People everywhere are witnessing in real time the consequences of impunity, the illegal use and threat of force, attacks on civilians, humanitarian workers, and UN personnel, unconstitutional changes of government, the trampling of human rights, the silencing of dissent, the plundering of resources, and the dangers do not stop with states or warring parties. They are being amplified by bottomless greed and inequality. The top 1% holds 43% of global financial assets. And last year alone, the richest 500 individuals added $2.2 trillion to their fortunes. Increasingly, we see a world where the ultra-wealthiest and the companies they control are calling the shots like never before, wielding outsized influence over economies, information, and even the rules that govern us all. When a handful of individuals can blend global narratives, sway elections, or dictate the terms of public debate, we are not just facing inequality, we are facing the corruption of institutions and our shared values. Look no further than artificial intelligence and the algorithms shaping our lives. These are too consequential to be controlled only by a few companies or optimized only to monetize attention and outrage. For instance, how do we protect our children from the tyranny of the algorithm? We must ensure humanity steers technology, not the other way around. And I thank you for your support for the independent scientific panel on AI and the global dialogue on AI governance. We need to keep working to build guardrails, accountability, shared standards, and the capacity to bridge the AI divide. The concentration of power and wealth in so few hands is morally indefensible. And more than that, it is a clear and present danger to the Charter and the promise of equal rights and dignity for all. That leads to the second principle. We must be relentless in our work for peace and justice, peace between nations, and peace with nature. Peace is at the heart of all we do. Yet, as we meet today, the snares of conflict have trapped millions of members of the human family in miserable, prolonged cycles of violence, hunger, and displacement. This suffering cannot go on. In Gaza, I welcome the start of phase 2 of the ceasefire announced by the US and reiterate that humanitarian aid must flow unimpeded, the ceasefire must be implemented in full, and the way must be cleared to an irreversible path to a two-state solution in accordance with international law. In Ukraine, where we must spare no effort to stop the fighting and achieve a just and lasting peace in line with UN Charter, international law, and UN resolutions. In Sudan, where the parties must agree on an immediate cessation of hostilities and the resumption of talks to reach a lasting ceasefire and a comprehensive, inclusive, and Sudanese-owned political process. Civilians must be protected. From Yemen to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, from Haiti to the Sahel, to Myanmar and around the world, we must never give up in the pursuit for peace. And throughout, we must recognize that silencing the guns is not enough. Peace is more than the absence of war. The root causes of conflict must be addressed. If not, any solution will be precarious. It's no coincidence that 9 of the 10 countries with the lowest human development indicators are currently in a state of conflict. Sustainable peace requires sustainable development. Yet, 10 years after the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, 2/3 of the targets are lagging. The world is falling short by over $4 trillion a year in the resources developing countries need to deliver on these promises by 2030. And developing countries are being battered and bruised by limited fiscal space, crushing debt burdens, and skyrocketing prices. We must advance on last year's Seville commitment, which set out an ambitious agenda to scale up finance, address the debt crisis, and reform the international financial architecture so developing countries can invest in the systems that support development and peace. And peace with justice means peace grounded in international law and on human rights, economic, social, cultural, civil, and political, which are inalienable, indivisible, and interdependent. We must safeguard freedom of speech and civic space. And on that note, I'm deeply concerned by the violent repression in Iran. We must open the doors of opportunity for women and girls around the world. And I want to stress that we cannot and will not give in to the disturbing pushback on the rights of women, half of humanity, and the hard-won gains in equality, participation, and protection. I'm proud that we achieved for the first time in UN history gender parity at senior levels. We are stronger for it, and we will keep going. And we'll also build on progress to expand meaningful engagement with young people, full inclusion with persons with disabilities, and real opportunities for indigenous peoples. All of this is essential to build a more equitable, peaceful, just, and sustainable future. Excellences, une paix juste suppose aussi de faire la paix avec la nature. Un monde plongé dans le chaos climatique ne peut être un monde en paix. Le changement climatique est un multiplicateur de risques, attisant les tensions autour des terres, de l'eau et de la nourriture, chassant les populations de leurs foyers et mettant à mal les écosystèmes dont nous dépendons tous. C'est aussi une profonde injustice. Celles et ceux qui ont le moins contribué sont les premiers et les plus durement touchés. Les dirigeants ont échoué à contenir le réchauffement en dessous de 1,5 degré Celsius. Un dépassement temporaire de ce seuil est désormais inévitable, mais pas irréversible. Notre mission est de rendre ce dépassement aussi faible, aussi bref et aussi sûr que possible, et d'infléchir immédiatement la courbe pour revenir vers 1,5 degré. Concrètement, cela demande d'aller au-delà des plans climatiques nationaux pour réduire les émissions dès maintenant et continuer à les réduire. Accélérer une transition juste, ordonnée et équitable des combustibles fossiles vers les énergies renouvelables, doubler l'efficacité énergétique d'ici à 2030, développer les réseaux et les systèmes de stockage pour acheminer l'énergie propre partout, réduire les émissions de méthane et mettre fin à la déforestation. Honorer les promesses en matière d'adaptation et de pertes et dommages. Et garantir des financements abordables et prévisibles qui parviennent à celles et à ceux qui en ont besoin quand ils en ont besoin. Investir dans la justice climatique, c'est investir dans la paix et la sécurité. Car la vulnérabilité, où qu'elle soit, devient un risque partout, avec des répercussions sur les systèmes financiers, les chaînes d'approvisionnement et la stabilité mondiale. Third and finally, our priority must be to build unity in an age of division. Around the world, we see the risk of societies breaking down under the weight of racism, nationalist xenophobia, and religious bigotry. These poisons are corroding the fabric of communities, fueling division and distrust. The dangers are not abstract. They are visible in the daily lives of millions, supercharged by rhetoric and disinformation that seeks to exclude rather than embrace. And it's not enough to denounce these impulses ideologically or to simply say, this is wrong. Many people feel left behind. They see wealth around them, and yet they struggle to get by. They feel that rapid globalization, together with technological progress, have undermined their prospects. They look at large movements of people and are told falsely that identity is a zero-sum game. Demographic trends heighten the urgency. The demographic dividend cannot materialize if young people don't see the dividends in their own lives. At the same time, aging societies cannot afford to turn inward to build walls, literally or figuratively. Doing so is a recipe for stagnation and worse. Every country has the sovereign right within the law to manage its borders and ensure its security. But migrants and refugees also have rights, rights that must be respected and protected wherever they are. Our challenge and our priority must be to build welcoming societies, not walled-off citadels. Societies that invest in the software of social cohesion, inclusion, education and skills, decent jobs, and social protection with a new social contract. Societies that build communities where everyone's identity is respected and all feel they belong and are bound by shared civic values. Harmony is never accidental. It requires deliberate policy, resources, and political courage. If we fail to put our common humanity first, we risk losing everything that makes us strong. The choice is clear: inclusion or isolation, renewal or decline. We must build united societies in a world of united nations. Excellencies, I've spoken plainly because the times demand it. We cannot afford complacency, denial, or delay. We cannot be bystanders to injustice, indifference, or impunity. And we have the power to chart a different course. The Charter gives us our compass. Our pursuit for peace with justice gives us our purpose. And our common humanity gives us the imperative to act. The world is changing, often in ways that are unsettling, but also in ways that are inspiring. The forces of division and inequality are powerful, but so too is our capacity for solidarity and justice. Even in the rough seas of today, we can anchor our action in peace, dignity, and hope. That takes the best efforts of everyone. Let's never forget who we are and what we represent. The United Nations is a living promise, a promise that despite our differences, we will solve problems together. Let's keep that promise. Let's never give up. The stakes could not be higher, and the time could not be shorter. And I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General of the United Nations. As mentioned earlier, I will now suspend the meeting for an informal meeting. The formal meeting will resume thereafter for delegations to deliver statements under agenda item 110. The formal plenary meeting is now suspended. I call to order this informal meeting on the priorities of the Secretary General of the United Nations for 2026. This meeting will not have a pre-established list of speakers. In order to request the floor, delegations are kindly requested to press the microphone button. Those speaking on behalf of a group should inform the Secretariat in order to be given priority in the speaking order. As stated in my letter dated January 6, 2026, speaking time during this informal meeting shall be limited to 3 minutes for delegations speaking in their national capacity and 5 minutes for statements made on behalf of a group of states. To assist delegations in managing their time, a countdown clock will be displayed on the screens. Please be advised that these time limits will be strictly enforced, including through the use of automatic microphone cutoff when the allowed time has expired. I thank you for your cooperation. As mentioned earlier, this segment will be followed by the resumption of the formal meeting, in which delegations will have an opportunity to deliver statements under agenda item 110. By this, I give the floor to His Excellency Mario Lubetkin, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Uruguay, on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, followed by the European Union and Palau.
Thanks, Ms. President. Es un honor pronunciar esta declaración en nombre del Grupo de los 77 y China. El Grupo de los 77 expresa el agradecimiento al Secretario General por la exposición de las prioridades para el 2026. Reconocemos que nuestro mundo continúa enfrentando desafíos complejos e interrelacionados que requieren una acción inmediata y coordinada, entre ellos los impactos cada vez mayores del cambio climático, la pobreza, el hambre, el aumento de los niveles de endeudamiento, la limitada financiación a los ODS, la pérdida de la biodiversidad, la creciente brecha digital y las medidas coercitivas unilaterales, así como la guerra y los conflictos persistentes que agravan la necesidad humanitaria en un contexto de disminución de recursos disponibles para atenderlos. El Grupo reafirma su apoyo al reiterado llamado del Secretario General a reconstruir la confianza y restaurar la esperanza mediante un multilateralismo inclusivo. Subrayamos la necesidad urgente de abordar las causas, raíz de los conflictos, poniendo énfasis en la paz duradera y en medidas para fortalecer la resiliencia, en particular en los países en desarrollo desproporcionadamente afectados por la inestabilidad. En materia de cambio climático, el 2025 sigue siendo un testigo de desafío sin precedentes, incluida la escalada de fenómenos meteorológicos extremos y el aumento de vulnerabilidad en los países por desarrollo. El grupo, por lo tanto, exhorta a la plena y oportuna implementación de todas las decisiones adoptadas en los periodos de las sesiones de las conferencias por parte de la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático, incluidas aquellas aprobadas en la COP30 celebrado en Belén. Reafirmamos que la Convención Marco de las Naciones Unidas sobre el Cambio Climático constituye el marco multilateral para abordar el cambio climático. Exhortamos enérgicamente a que se refuerce el financiamiento del Fondo para Pérdidas y Daños a fin de apoyar a los países en desarrollo más vulnerables. El grupo subraya la necesidad de un sistema financiero mundial que atienda de manera equitativa las necesidades de todas las naciones, en particular de los países en desarrollo. Exhortamos a una reforma integral y urgente de la arquitectura financiera internacional para abordar las desigualdades estructurales, garantizar un acceso justo a la financiación a largo plazo y promover el desarrollo sostenible. En este sentido, el grupo también hace un llamado a la plena y oportuna implementación de los compromisos acordados en el Compromiso de Sevilla, adoptado durante la Cuarta Conferencia Internacional sobre la Financiación para el Desarrollo, realizado en junio del 2025. La erradicación de la pobreza en todas sus formas y dimensiones sigue siendo un elemento fundamental en nuestros esfuerzos para lograr el desarrollo sostenible. Reiteramos nuestro llamado a la comunidad internacional para que proporcione el apoyo necesario a todos los países en desarrollo para erradicar la pobreza. Por lo tanto, respaldamos todas las propuestas del secretario general dirigidas a abordar la erradicación de la pobreza, que sigue siendo el mayor desafío global. El hambre y la seguridad alimentaria continúan siendo cuestiones críticas para muchos países en desarrollo y por eso destacamos la importancia de acciones concretas que incluyan inversiones sólidas a la resiliencia agrícola y los sistemas alimentarios para erradicar la pobreza, eliminar el hambre y alcanzar los objetivos del 2030. La rápida evolución de la tecnología, incluida la inteligencia artificial, presenta oportunidades de transformación, pero también riesgos de profundizar las brechas existentes. Consideramos la transformación digital como un medio fundamental para lograr los ODS y abordar desafíos como la educación de calidad, la atención sanitaria y la acción climática. El grupo expresa su preocupación por la situación financiera que viven las Naciones Unidas, la cual se debe al incumplimiento de algunos Estados miembros en el pago oportuno de sus contribuciones. Instamos a los Estados miembros a cumplir sus compromisos financieros en su totalidad y de manera puntual a fin de evitar socavar el proceso y los mandatos críticos. Al mismo tiempo expresamos nuestra empatía con aquellos que no pueden cumplir sus obligaciones debido a circunstancias fuera de su control. En el 2026 nos ofrece oportunidades significativas para acelerar el progreso como el Foro de Seguimiento sobre la Financiación para el Desarrollo, el Foro Político de Alto Nivel sobre el Desarrollo Sostenible, la Reunión Especial sobre Integridad Financiera y la implementación del panel científico de independencia sobre inteligencia artificial, el primer diálogo global sobre la gobernanza de la inteligencia artificial, entre otros. El grupo está dispuesto a participar de manera constructiva en el proceso UN 80 en el 2026 con el objetivo de garantizar que los mandatos se adecúen a los propósitos, que los recursos se utilicen de manera eficaz y que las prioridades de los países.
I think the distinguished representative of Uruguay, Minister for Foreign Affairs, on behalf of the Group of 77 and China. I now give the floor to the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states. The floor to the distinguished representative.
Mr. Secretary General, Madam President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union's member states. The candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Andorra, Monaco, and San Marino, align themselves with this statement. Mr. Secretary General, thank you for your briefing and for your steadfast leadership. As you enter the final year of your mandate, we wish to underscore your commitment to this organization and to the values on which it was founded, values that today are under severe strain. At the outset, allow me to pay tribute to the women and men of the United Nations. They deserve our utmost respect and protection. Violence against them must stop. You have reminded us of a hard truth. We live in a world marked by deep fractures, multiplying crises, and growing mistrust. Yet, multilateralism remains indispensable. The UN Charter and international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law, remain our shared foundation. When international law is upheld, lives and dignity are protected and peace can endure. When it is violated with impunity, suffering spreads. from Ukraine to Gaza and Iran, from Sudan to Afghanistan, from Haiti to Myanmar and beyond. Disinformation and polarization further erode trust and our capacity to act. Ms. Secretary General, the European Union remains a powerful and principal partner of the United Nations. Most recently, we used our convening power and diplomatic engagement to ensure the consensual adoption of the UN's 2026 budget, safeguarding the organization's ability to deliver. The adoption of the revised estimates reflects broad support for UN80 reform agenda. We must maintain momentum. A United Nations that is effective, accountable, and transparent and fit for purpose is a necessity. Dear colleagues, restoring trust, strengthening partnerships, and delivering results for people, especially those furthest behind, must be a collective priority. On peace and security, we support a renewed commitment to the UN Charter and decisive investment in prevention, mediation, peacekeeping, and peace building. Prevention saves lives and resources and offers hope before violence takes hold. We support, your good offices, the implementation of the PBAR and the adaptation of peace operations to today's realities. We must also protect and strengthen the global disarmament and non-proliferation architecture. The UN remains indispensable to prevent and end wars and to build peace. On sustainable development, we must move from ambition to delivery. With only 4 years left to achieve the SDGs, progress remains far too slow. This is a call to act differently and together. The Pact for the Future must accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda. In line with the Seville commitment, the EU will continue to invest in sustainable and inclusive development, including through Global Gateway, and to support efforts to improve the international financial architecture. On human rights in 2026, we must continue to stand firm. Human rights are not optional nor selective. They are central to human dignity, peace, and sustainable development. The UN's human rights pillar must be protected and empowered. Gender equality is essential across our work. Respect for international humanitarian law and principled humanitarian action is being tested as never before. Despite all challenges, the EU and its member states remain the world's leading humanitarian donor, having mobilized $8.5 billion in 2025 alone. We will continue to uphold the humanitarian imperative to save lives and ensure that gender equality and climate considerations remain integral. Ms. Secretary General, for all this to succeed, we need a financially stable United Nations. The UN and its member states are the biggest collective contributors, consistently paying on time, in full, and without conditions. Others must do the same. As we enter a turbulent 2026, one message stands out. Trust is our most precious currency. Trust in our institutions, in the rule of law, and in one another, most importantly, in one another. The European Union and its member states will work with all partners across regions and with civil society to strengthen this organization and ensure it remains a source of hope, protection, and solutions for generations to come. And we will stand by you, Mr. Secretary General, during this all-important final year of yours in office. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, followed by Bahrain and Lesotho.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. At the outset, I wish to express AOSIS's appreciation to the Secretary General for this briefing and for outlining his priorities for 2026. As we consider these priorities, we do so against a backdrop of deepening global uncertainty, accelerating climate impacts, and a multilateral system under severe strain. For AOSIS, the United Nations remain indispensable for maintaining global peace, upholding international law, and ensuring the prosperity of small island developing states. The months ahead will either shape our collective failure or our collective success. AOSIS remains committed to ensuring the latter. To do this, the multilateral system must be strengthened, not hollowed out. At a time of geopolitical fragmentation and fiscal pressures, the UN's convening power, leadership, and development role are more essential than ever. Reform efforts, including those under UN80, must result in an organization that is more responsive, inclusive, and effective, particularly for SIDS. At the same time, the special circumstances of SIDS must be fully operationalized across the multilateral system. In this context, AOSIS underscores the importance of the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS and calls for its full and timely implementation. Madam President, the protection of the global environment remains critical. In 2026, we require the continued leadership of the Secretary General to drive emissions down, keep 1.5 degrees within reach, and ensure all states fulfill their UNFCCC and Paris Agreement commitments. The recent ICJ advisory opinion affirms that states have legal obligations on climate action. It is not just a political commitment. The entry into force of the BBNJ agreement this year and the convening of its first conference of the parties also represents a landmark moment for ocean governance. For AOSIS, the ocean is not only an environmental priority, it is central to our identity, livelihoods, and survival. Madam President, the international financial architecture must be reformed. The global financial system remains misaligned with today's financial landscape, relying on narrow income-based classifications that obscure vulnerability and limits access to finance, constrains fiscal space, and undermines sustainable development in SIDS. The Sevilla Commitment reaffirmed the need to realign global financial rules and institutions with vulnerability and resilience. In 2026, this must translate into concrete reforms, including meaningful operationalization and use of the Multi-Dimensional Vulnerability Index to inform access to consensual finance, debt sustainability, and development cooperation. Madam President, as today's briefing remarks the Secretary General's last presentation of his priorities for the year under his tenure, AOSIS wishes to place on record its deep appreciation for his astute leadership and steadfast commitment to small island developing states. Throughout his term, the Secretary General has consistently advocated for a robust multilateral system, championed the 1.5-degree goal, and amplified the voices of the most vulnerable, including SIDS. Mr. Secretary General, AOSIS thanks you for standing with small island developing states during moments of profound global challenge. We look forward to continuing this work with you over the next 12 months, guided by the principles of solidarity, equity, and justice that you have so clearly championed over the last 9 years. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bahrain on behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Bahrain? Somehow the microphone is not working. I see that you press it. Yeah, now.
السيدة الرئيسة، يشرفني أن ألقي هذا البيان باسم دول مجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية، وهي الإمارات العربية المتحدة والمملكة العربية السعودية وسلطنة عمان ودولة قطر ودولة الكويت وبلادي مملكة البحرين. تتقدم دول مجلس التعاون بالشكر لمعالي الأمين العام على تقريره السنوي واستعراضه لأولوياته خلال العام 2026. معربة عن تقديرها لقيادته الحكيمة لأعمال المنظمة في هذه المرحلة الدقيقة تزامناً مع الذكرى 80 لتأسيسها في ظل ما يواجهه المجتمع الدولي من تحديات معقدة. كما تجدد دول المجلس دعمها لجهوده المتواصلة في إرساء السلام استناداً إلى مبادئ ميثاق الأمم المتحدة والقانون الدولي وتعزيز الحوار والتعاون الدولي بما يسهم في النهوض بالعمل متعدد الأطراف وترسيخ القيم الإنسانية المشتركة. السيدة الرئيسة، جاء اعتماد الجمعية العامة العام الماضي للقرار المعنون التعاون بين الأمم المتحدة ومجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية كخطوة تعكس تنامي الشراكة بين الجانبين وأهميتها المتزايدة على الساحة الدولية، بما يسهم في تكامل الجهود الدولية والإقليمية لمواجهة التحديات المشتركة وتعزيز السلم والاستقرار والتنمية المستدامة. وقد أكد إعلان الصادر عن الدورة 46 للمجلس الأعلى لمجلس التعاون لدول الخليج العربية التي عقدت في مملكة البحرين خلال شهر ديسمبر الماضي على تمسك دول مجلس التعاون بتوطيد الشراكة والتعاون السياسي والأمني والاقتصادي مع الدول الصديقة والمنظمات الدولية والتكتلات الاقتصادية بما في ذلك الأمم المتحدة. وحرصا على تحقيق سلام عادل ودائم في الشرق الأوسط، رحبت دول المجلس بمخرجات قمة شرم الشيخ للسلام، مؤكدة دعمها الكامل للجهود الرامية إلى ضمان الالتزام الكامل ببنود اتفاق إنهاء الحرب في قطاع غزة وتيسير إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية وإعادة الإعمار وتعزيز الجهود والمساعي المؤدية إلى إقامة دولة فلسطينية مستقلة ذات سيادة على حدود 4 يونيو 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية وفقاً لحل الدولتين ومبادرة السلام العربية وقرارات الشرعية الدولية. وفي هذا السياق ترحب دول مجلس التعاون باعتماد الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة لإعلان نيويورك. السيدة الرئيسة، في ظل التحولات الرقمية المتسارعة، تؤكد دول مجلس التعاون أهمية تسخير التكنولوجيا والذكاء الاصطناعي والأمن السيبراني على نحو مسؤول يخدم الإنسانية. وفي هذا السياق ترحب دول المجلس بإنشاء فريق علمي دولي مستقل معني بالذكاء الاصطناعي، وتطلع إلى المشاركة الفاعلة في الحوار العالمي السنوي حول حوكمة الذكاء الاصطناعي المقرر عقده خلال العام الجاري. وتشاطر دول مجلس التعاون المجتمع الدولي القلق إزاء ظاهرة تغير المناخ، وترحب بعقد مؤتمر الأمم المتحدة للمياه 2026 في دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة بالشراكة مع جمهورية السنغال، باعتباره محطة مهمة لدعم تحقيق الهدف السادس من أهداف التنمية المستدامة وتعزيز الأمن المائي والتصدي لتحديات تغير المناخ. السيدة الرئيسة، فيما يتعلق بجهود إصلاح منظومة الأمم المتحدة وخاصة مبادرة UN80، تؤكد دول مجلس التعاون أهمية أن تكون العملية شاملة وشفافة وتقودها الدول الأعضاء، بما يحافظ على الطابع الحكومي الدولي للمنظمة ودورها في تعزيز التنمية المستدامة والسلم والأمن الدوليين. كما تشدد على أهمية أن تركز الإصلاحات على تعزيز كفاءة وفعالية المنظومة دون المساس باختصاصات أجهزتها الرئيسية. وفي الختام، تؤكد دول مجلس التعاون ضرورة تكثيف الجهود الدولية من خلال الاستحقاقات الأممية الرئيسة المقرر عقدها خلال عام 2026، بما يسهم في دعم تنفيذ أهداف التنمية المستدامة وتحقيق المصلحة المشتركة للإنسانية جمعاء. وتجدد حرص دول المجلس على العمل الوثيق مع الأمين العام ومنظومة الأمم المتحدة لمواجهة التحديات الراهنة. وشكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bahrain. On behalf of the Gulf Cooperation Council, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lesotho on behalf of the African Group, followed by El Salvador and the Philippines.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Africa Group. We thank you, Madam President, for convening this important meeting. The Africa Group expresses its appreciation to the Secretary General for his briefing on his priorities for 2026. We meet at a time of unprecedented challenges. Conflicts ravage multiple regions, including our continent. The climate emergency intensifies. Poverty and inequality persists, threatening decades of development gains. In this context, Africa remains firmly committed to the United Nations and the purposes and principles enshrined in its charter. On peace and security, the Africa Group notes with concern that the continent continues to bear a disproportionate burden of conflicts and humanitarian crisis. From the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, millions of our citizens suffer the consequences of instability. The group calls upon the Secretary General to intensify support for Africa-led peace initiatives and genuine partnership with the African Union and regional economic communities. It further reiterates the importance of the full operationalization of the Security Council Resolution 2719 on financing for African Union-led peace support operations authorized by the Security Council. On sustainable development, the Africa Group is deeply concerned that with less than 5 years to the 2030 deadline, progress on the sustainable development goals remains inadequate in Africa. The COVID-19 pandemic, climate impacts, rising debt levels, and geographical tensions have reversed development gains. We therefore call upon the Secretary General to ensure that the United Nations system prioritizes support for developing countries in accelerating progress towards the SDGs. The commitments made in the Seville commitment must be translated into concrete actions, and the international financial architecture must be reformed to address unsustainable debt burdens and ensure adequate access to concessional financing for African countries. On climate change, Africa remains the most vulnerable continent to adverse climate impacts, despite contributing the least to global emissions. We call upon the Secretary General to continue advocating for ambitious climate action and adequate climate finance. Madam President, on the UN8 initiative, the Africa Group supports efforts to make the United Nations more effective and fit for purpose. However, reform must be strengthened rather than weaken the organization's capacity to deliver, particularly for developing countries. The mandate implementation review must be conducted transparently, inclusively, and with full respect for intergovernmental processes. The Africa Group reiterates that Security Council reform remains essential. The Council's current composition does not reflect contemporary realities and perpetuates historical injustice. We therefore reiterate our call and as articulated in the Ezulini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration for Africa to be allowed no fewer than 2 permanent seats with all prerogatives and privileges of permanent membership, including the right of veto, as well as 5 non-permanent seats. As we approach the selection of the Secretary General, the Africa Group emphasizes the importance of a transparent, inclusive, and merit-based process. In conclusion, the Africa Group reaffirms its commitment to multilateralism and the United Nations. We stand ready to work constructively with the Secretary General and the President of the General Assembly and all member states. Through genuine partnership and shared commitment to the Charter, we can build a more peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lesotho on behalf of the African Group. I now give the floor to El Salvador, also on behalf of Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for briefing us and also for the clarity of your vision for 2026 that you have shared with us today. I take the floor on behalf of the co-chairs of the Global Dialogue on Artificial Intelligence Governance, El Salvador and Estonia. This dialogue will be an important issue of the organization's work in the year ahead. The establishment of the Global Dialogue reflects a shared recognition by member states that artificial intelligence has become a defining question for development and international cooperation, and that it requires an inclusive platform within the United Nations. This platform brings countries together while also enabling the meaningful participation of relevant stakeholders whose perspectives, expertise, and experience can contribute to inform, balance, and forward-looking discussion on its international aspects. As co-chairs, we see the Global Dialogue as an opportunity to foster trust, mutual understanding, and cooperation in a rapidly evolving and increasingly complex global landscape. It is intended as a space that builds on existing efforts, promotes coherence, and benefits from the complementarity contributions of governments, international organizations, the private sector, academia, the technical community, and civil society in a manner that is inclusive and respectful of different roles and mandates. We are particularly mindful that for many countries, discussions on AI are closely linked to broader development considerations, including access to technology, skills, infrastructure, and institutional capacity. In this context, contribution from a wide range of actors can help illuminate practical realities, identify capacity-building needs, and support more effective international cooperation while ensuring that member states remain fully engaged throughout the process. As the preparatory work advances, we remain fully committed to conduct it precisely, a process that is balanced, transparent, and responsive to member states, while drawing on the support of the Secretariat and relevant entities of the UN system. In this regard, Mr. Secretary General, your continued engagement will be essential to ensuring that the first global dialogue is truly meaningful, credible, and widely owned, and that it contributes constructively to the organization's work in the year ahead, and obviously all member states. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of El Salvador on behalf of the co-chairs. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines on behalf of the like-minded group for middle-income countries, followed by Fiji and Nepal.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the like-minded group for middle-income countries composed of Armenia, Belarus, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, Lebanon, Mexico, Morocco, Namibia, Panama, Peru, the Philippines, and Uruguay. We thank the Secretary General for his briefing on priorities for 2026. May I also extend our commendation of the Secretary General's exemplary leadership and commitment to the causes of peace, development, and the UN Charter. With multilateralism and the United Nations confronted by serious challenges, we must all continue to work together for sustainable development. As reflected in the latest report of the Secretary General on development cooperation with middle-income countries represent more than half of UN membership, are home to more than 70% of global population, contribute a third of global GDP, and our development is setting the pace of progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, most of the world's poor reside within middle-income countries. Hence, addressing the middle-income trap remains an imperative for the international community. The Makati Declaration strongly calls for paving the pathways of transition for middle-income countries. The LMG mix will pursue the following 6 priorities in engaging in the work of the UN this year. First, we look forward to consultations on the elaboration of a strategic plan of action for middle-income countries, as mandated in the recent resolution, Development Cooperation with Middle-Income Countries. A plan of action designed and led by MIX will catalyze efforts towards addressing the specific challenges facing middle-income countries and galvanize further support from member states, UN agencies, and relevant stakeholders. Second, we also look forward to the elaboration of a comprehensive system-wide response plan by the UN system aimed at delivering tailored support for middle-income countries. This was a mandate in the resolution on MIX at the 78th session of the UNGA, as well as in the Sevilla Commitment. Third, we will actively participate in the process of advancing metrics beyond GDP. The LMG MIX have consistently championed this call, reflected in both the Pact for the Future and the Sevilla Commitment, as per capita income alone cannot capture the complexity of our development needs. Fourth, we will continue to support reform of the international financial architecture. In particular, debt challenges continue to profoundly affect middle-income countries. Fifth, in line with the Sevilla Commitment, we underscore that South-South and triangular cooperation are essential for advancing the SDGs in middle-income countries, enhancing their impact through deeper partnerships, knowledge sharing, and innovative financing. We will strengthen regional mechanisms to ensure that these modalities remain demand-driven and fully aligned with mixed priorities. Sixth, we firmly believe that the UN 80 process should not dilute agreed goals and aspirations, especially the 2030 Agenda. The UN must continue to deliver in the development pillar while striving for more efficiency. In this regard, discussions on reforms of the organization should take into full account the specificities of middle-income countries for greater effectiveness and impact. In conclusion, Madam President, we remain fully committed to supporting the Secretary General's priorities for this year and to promoting multilateralism and international cooperation with a strong United Nations at its heart. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines on behalf of the like-minded group for middle-income countries. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Fiji on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States.
Madam President, Excellencies and colleagues, Mr. Secretary General, it is an honor to be present today to listen to your priorities for 2026. Thank you very much. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Pacific Islands Small Developing States, PCs, as the Secretary General presents his work plan for 2026, his 8th and final year leading this institution. We align our statement with a statement delivered by Palau on behalf of AOSIS. Mr. Secretary General, you assumed leadership at a time when the foundations of multilateralism were being tested through wars, pandemics, climate catastrophes, and eroding trust between nations. You have provided something both rare and essential, a virtuous and humble resolve. For the Pacific Small Island Developing States, your leadership represents something unprecedented. You were the most actively committed Secretary General in our region, one that gave direct, sustained, and personal attention to our people. In 2019, you traveled to Fiji, Vanuatu, and Tuvalu, addressing Pacific leaders at the forum in Suva. In 2024, you returned to Tonga and Samoa for the Pacific Islands Forum. Last year, you visited Papua New Guinea in early September before you joined our leaders virtually from New York when they gathered in Honiara. This was not symbolic. You understood that challenges facing SEADS are central to questions of international law, human security, climate justice, and the future of multilateralism itself. Mr. Secretary General, you have named climate change what it is, the defining security threat of our age. When you stood on Pacific soil and declared, if we save the Pacific, we save the world, you transformed our fight for survival from a regional concern into a global priority. The Paris Agreement's 1.5-degree target, which you have defended relentlessly, is not an abstract number for us. It is the difference between adaptation and extinction. You have navigated circumstances that would have broken lesser leaders. COVID-19, multiplying armed conflicts, sustained assault on the multilateral system itself. Through it all, you have maintained unwavering commitment to the UN Charter's principles, even when it cost you political capital, even when powerful member states objected, even when silence would have been easier. Your support for the MVI, your advocacy for climate finance that reaches those most in need, your championing of the Pacific Resilience Facility, this reflects a Secretary General who understands that justice cannot be separated from development. You have spoken truth to power, all powers, when human rights were violated, when international law was breached, when the vulnerable were abandoned. You have refused to let the UN become merely an instrument of great power politics. As you enter your final year, we acknowledge the weight you have carried, the criticism you have endured from all sides, a sure sign you have remained faithful to the institution rather than to any faction. The challenges have not diminished, but you have given us proof that this institution remains essential, that multilateralism remains humanity's best hope, that moral leadership still matters. And you have given the PCs something we have never received before, recognition demonstrated through your personal presence, not once, but twice, that our survival is not negotiable, that our voices matter, that our place in this assembly is essential to the legitimacy and future of the United Nations itself. The Pacific Small Island Developing States stand with you. We support your vision. We will advocate for resources you need. We will defend the principles you have upheld. The Pacific has a tradition of wayfinding, navigating vast ocean, using stars, currents, and ancestral knowledge when others see only chaos. You have been a wayfinder for this institution through some of the darkest waters since the Second World War. As you chart the course of your final year, know that you do not stand alone. We thank you for your service. We honor your integrity. We pledge your continued support. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Fiji on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Developing States. I now give the floor to Nepal on behalf of the least developing countries, followed by Guyana and Romania.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, The group of the LDCs deeply appreciate the Secretary General for his briefing on the priorities for 2026. We highly value these priorities at a time of profound global uncertainty and the imperative for a stronger and inclusive multilateralism to address global crises and challenges we are facing. We commend you, Mr. Secretary General, for your steadfast leadership and the commitment to a more robust, responsive, and effective multilateral systems with the UN at its core. Madam President, let me highlight a few priorities for the LDCs. First, as multiple global crises continue to disproportionately affect LDCs, we call for a systemic response to these intersecting challenges. This requires scale of constitutional finance, comprehensive and timely debt treatments, decisive progress on the SDG stimulus, including SDR rechanneling and state contingent instruments, and climate action that advances adaptations, loss and damage, and just transitions, reflecting the special circumstances of the LDCs. Global governance reforms must be designed and implemented with the full and effective participation of the LDCs. We underscore the urgency of timely, fully and effective implementation of the Sabia commitment on financing for development. Second, despite significant headwinds, LDCs continue to demonstrate resilience and make concrete progress on the graduations, with 14 more countries on the graduation pathway. The Secretary General once said, I quote, "Graduations must be a reward, never a punishment," unquote. On this is reflected in the outcome of the high-level meeting on graduations held in Doha last month. Predictable, adequate, and incentive-based international support for graduating and graduated countries is a must for their smooth, resilient, and irreversible graduation. Third, we call for a renewed and recalibrated focus on LDCs across all three pillars of the UN's work so that the SDG and DPOA can be delivered. In fact, delivering for LDCs is a precondition for delivering on the SDG globally. We therefore urge a stronger, integrated, country-driven UN system that is aligned with nationally owned development plans and graduation strategies. Fourth, LDCs need a stronger, more effective, and responsive UN now more than ever. The UN80 must serve as an opportunity to renew and reinvigorate multilateralism while delivering better on the ground. Fifth, the DPOA midterm review being held in Doha 2027 is critical to take stock, adjust course, and renew global commitments to LDCs through an evidence-based, inclusive, and action-oriented process. The group counts the Secretary General's full support, including through analytical capacities and convening power and coherent linkages with the Pact of the Future, financing for development, and climate processes, so that LDC's priorities are consistently reflected and acted upon. Madam President, the group reiterates its full support to the Secretary General and stands ready to work constructively with the UN membership and international community. Together, we must ensure that at 80, the UN delivers on the promises of its Charter and the 2030 Agenda for 1.2 billion people living in LDCs and for future generations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developing countries. I now give the floor to Grenada on behalf of the Caribbean community, followed by Romania and Indonesia.
President. Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean community and to align ourselves with the statements delivered on behalf of the Group of 77 and the Alliance of Small Island States. We meet at a time of intensified challenges, geopolitical, environmental, and economic. Across almost every region, conflict and insecurity are growing. Defense spending is increasing while resources for development are being reduced. At the same time, the selective application of international law is weakening confidence in the rule-based international order. For small island developing states, this is not an abstract concern. When multilateralism is weakened and international law is applied inconsistently, it is those with the least power and the greatest vulnerability who bear the heaviest cost. In this context, the United Nations has never been more important. The UN remains the only truly universal institution where all states can engage on equal footing, where dialogue can be sustained even in times of crisis, and where collective solutions can be built. Mr. Secretary General, your role in this moment is pivotal. You provide steady leadership to a global institution operating under exceptional strain, and your role as both moral voice and institutional steward is essential to the credibility and effectiveness of the United Nations. As member states, we too have an equal responsibility to uphold that credibility. CARICOM has given its full support to the UN 80 initiative and to the creation of stronger, more fit-for-purpose organization. A more agile and financially sound United Nations must also be a more equitable and responsive one, especially for those who are most vulnerable. The continued impactful presence on the ground in our countries and region remains of paramount importance for the Caribbean. Madam President, CARICOM wishes therefore to highlight 3 priority areas where sustained UN engagement is essential. First, peace and security. This includes the illicit trafficking in arms and drugs, which continue to destabilize societies and weaken state institutions globally. We underscore the dire situation in Haiti, which is a test of international solidarity. The work of BINU and UNSOH alongside the gang suppression force remains vital to supporting Haiti's return to democratic governance, restoring security, and addressing the profound injustices suffered by the most vulnerable, particularly women, girls, and children. Sustained political engagement and coordinated international support are imperative. Second, development and resilience. The full and effective implementation of Antigua and Barbuda agenda for SIDS lies at the heart of our priorities. Climate shocks, external economic volatility, high debts, and constrained access to concessional finance are largely beyond our control, yet they shape our developmental prospects. We count on your leadership, Mr. Secretary General, to accelerate the implementation of ABAS, including tools such as the MVI. We are also convinced, like you, that the international financial architecture needs urgent reform so that the international system can better respond to the special circumstance of SIDS and other vulnerable countries. Third, environmental sustainability. The climate crisis, ocean degradation, and biodiversity loss are defining challenges of our time. None of these can be addressed by any country acting alone. They demand collective action, and the United Nations system remains the principal organ through which that cooperation must be mobilized. Finally, Mr. Secretary General, we commend your persistence and your courageous leadership at a time of extraordinary geopolitical tensions. CARICOM will continue to work with you to ensure that the United Nations remain a strong, credible, and effective pillar of the international system. We thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Grenada on behalf of CARICOM. By this, we end the statements by groups, on behalf of groups, and come to statements from individual member states. Please be aware of the 3-minute time limit, starting by the distinguished representative of Romania, followed by Indonesia and Cuba.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I would like to add a few points in addition to the statement delivered by the European Union. And I would like first and foremost to thank the Secretary General for a very candid outlook on the current state of play in the international community. We do hear and fully share your call, Mr. Secretary General, and the urgency to rise up to meet the multidimensional challenges threatening the very fabric of our multilateral architecture. The 80th UN anniversary coincides with a pivotal moment for the organization, and a predictable and stable environment where member states can enjoy security, prosperity, and the protection of fundamental freedoms is dependent indeed on a solid international legal order. I do want to echo your call on member states respecting strictly the UN Charter and its principles, but also the purposes. They are non-negotiable indeed if we want to restore trust in the international community and achieve peace. We also acknowledge the need to have an honest assessment and prepare an adequate response to make the UN more fit for purpose 8 decades later on. And Romania strongly supports your bold UN 80 initiative reform agenda, and we believe that indeed it is the best vehicle to strengthen the multilateral system and equip the necessary means, the United Nations with the necessary means to respond to current challenges. It is in this spirit, Secretary General, that Romania undertook with the responsibility of the co-chairmanship of the negotiations and the revitalization of the work of the General Assembly together with our colleagues from South Africa during the previous session, and we are pleased that Resolution 79327 is indeed a good baseline for ongoing discussions on the UN 80, as well as on the process for the selection and appointment of the Secretary General. We expect the upcoming consultations to build on the commitments undertaken collectively in Resolution 79327 in compliance with our responsibility to implement mandates, and I look forward to continue working closely with my colleague from St. Kitts and Nevis. You have mentioned the mergers of a number of entities in the UN system. As I have been appointed as president of the UNDP, UNFPA, UNOPS board, I do look forward to turn every stone together with board members, but also with member states, and to identify the best option for advancing these proposed mergers, which I have to say it was a very courageous idea, which in time matured and morphed into a quite significant and dynamic debate between the bureaus of those boards and with the Secretariat. And we are indeed committed to pushing forward this reform agenda and to make sure that the consultation process will.
I thank the distinguished representative of Romania. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam President, and I also wish to thank the Secretary General for his important and insightful briefing. The Secretary General's report and briefing convey stark assessment of the deepening challenges and chaos confronting humanity on all fronts. Yet he also conveys vision and determination. And in this regard, allow me to start by extending Indonesia's heartfelt appreciation to the Secretary General for his relentless work in defending multilateralism, in defending humanity. The road ahead will be even more challenging. Expectations are high that we will continue to have a Secretary General who safeguards multilateralism and defends international law. Having an inclusive, transparent, and accountable process is key. Madam President, this year begins with fundamental questions about the limits of multilateralism and the sanctity of international law. History tells us that a global order built on power alone is not sustainable. Indonesia's experience in our own region shows that an international order better delivers when it embraces, not dominates. In this regard, I wish to call for 2 urgent actions. First, rebuild trust and predictability. Upholding multilateralism and international law is the only path to peace. Multilateralism must be re-anchored in problem-solving, not power rivalries. An a la carte approach to international law will only open a dangerous Pandora's box. Second, transform uncertainty into opportunity. We must seize the UN 80 to reinforce the UN as an effective, inclusive platform for collective actions. We must continue to advance sustainable development as part and parcel of a peaceful world. The Secretary General has repeatedly called for a more networked, inclusive, and effective multilateralism. It is timely to revive the call, working together in navigating complex challenges, including by accelerating the UN reform. Madam President, amidst a global outlook that is increasingly more and more chaotic, Indonesia continues to advocate for dialogue, cooperation, partnership, and multilateral solutions. As my President Prabowo Subianto underlined in this very hall last September, we must stand for a multilateral order where the weak do not suffer what they must, but live with the justice they deserve. Let us not retreat from multilateralism. Let us strengthen it together. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba, followed by the United Kingdom and Germany.
Señora Presidenta, señor Secretario General, Cuba se adhiere a las intervenciones realizadas por Uruguay y Palau en nombre del G77 y China y AOSIS respectivamente. Agradecemos la presentación del Secretario General. Como el propio Secretario General ha advertido, el mundo atraviesa una confluencia de crisis, conflictos, desigualdades crecientes, emergencia climática, debilitamiento del derecho internacional y desconfianza en las instituciones. La paz y la seguridad internacionales penden hoy de un hilo delicado, debido a las amenazas crecientes, las agresiones militares bajo pretextos infundados y la proliferación de ideas supremacistas y fascistas que irrespetan los principios de esta organización. Lo hemos dicho y no nos cansaremos de repetirlo. Condenamos enérgicamente la agresión militar de Estados Unidos contra Venezuela y ratificamos nuestro respaldo y solidaridad con ese hermano país y su gobierno. Esa cobarde agresión es un acto criminal, violatorio del derecho internacional, la Carta de la ONU y la proclama de América Latina y el Caribe como zona de paz. No debe haber una transgresión a la Carta sin una condena firme de la comunidad internacional, la ONU y su liderazgo. Ante este escenario, la ONU debe seguir siendo el foro por excelencia para abordar los desafíos globales y promover la cooperación internacional y el multilateralismo. En este sentido, instamos a centrar nuestros esfuerzos en detener sin demora el paradigma de la guerra y la coerción y de la imposición de la paz por medio de la fuerza. Necesitamos un mundo de paz, justicia social y respeto a la pluralidad cultural, étnica y religiosa. Erradicar las causas profundas de los conflictos, atender las desigualdades estructurales, la pobreza y el subdesarrollo y poner fin al colonialismo en todas sus formas y manifestaciones. Impulsar la reforma del actual orden económico internacional y de su arquitectura financiera. Los países del sur deben participar en pie de igualdad en la toma de decisiones a nivel global. Propiciar un compromiso renovado con la Agenda 2030 a menos de 5 años del plazo fijado para su cumplimiento. Tomar acciones urgentes y ambiciosas para enfrentar el cambio climático que amenaza la supervivencia de todos, especialmente de los pequeños estados insulares en desarrollo. Abordar la cuestión de los derechos humanos sin politización ni dobles raseros, sobre la base de la cooperación y el respeto al derecho de cada país a escoger su sistema político, económico y social sin injerencias externas. Fortalecer la ONU y adaptarla a los retos actuales sin comprometer su naturaleza intergubernamental. Defender un mundo sin crueles bloqueos ni medidas coercitivas unilaterales contrarias al derecho internacional. Honremos el compromiso de hace 80 años de preservar a las generaciones venideras del flagelo de la guerra y a construir un mundo de paz. Es nuestra responsabilidad colectiva y nuestro deber histórico. Urgen hechos, no palabras. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Secretary-General, let me begin by expressing our sincere thanks to you for your leadership over these past 9 years. You've steered the United Nations through an era of unprecedented global challenge with vision and resolve. Under your tenure and with our support, the UN has advanced major priorities, elevating climate action to the top of the global agenda, championing digital cooperation and strengthening humanitarian response in times of crisis. The adoption of the Pact for the Future stands as a landmark achievement, charting a course for a more inclusive, sustainable and resilient world order. But as you've set out this morning, there's no shortage of challenges ahead for the organisation, for multilateralism and for our planet. Your New Year's message set the tone for the months ahead. We must, as you said, get our priorities straight. We must choose people and planet over pain. And as you said so powerfully this morning, we must work full steam ahead, fully and faithfully in support of the Charter as an important living promise to the people of the world. Alongside the three principles you highlighted, we welcome your UN80 reform initiative and your commitment to make this organization more inclusive, more efficient, and better able to serve those who depend on it most. And we welcome your clear message today about taking that forward with continued high ambition. These efforts are essential to ensuring the UN can meet the defining challenges of our time, and the UK stands ready to work with you and all member states to advance this important agenda. Madam President, Mr. Secretary-General, this week we mark 80 years since the first General Assembly, Security Council and ECOSOC meetings held in London in January 1946. And we look forward to welcoming you to London this weekend to celebrate this important anniversary. As we reflect on this organization's first 8 decades, we recall the remarkable efforts and achievements of those first delegates who came together in the extraordinary circumstances of the aftermath of World War. And we renew their conviction that nations acting together can achieve far more than they can alone. Let us approach the year ahead in that spirit, determined to work together to deliver the progress that this world so urgently needs. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany, followed by the Russian Federation and Tajikistan.
Madam President, thank you very much. Germany fully aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. Mr. Secretary General, we thank you very much for your steadfast leadership, your continued commitment, your guidance and your clarity throughout your tenure and this morning. Our multilateral system is facing unprecedented challenges, and violations of the UN Charter are on the rise, and we must fight this trend. Our history shows that we can tackle the most pressing global challenges best through international cooperation and within a functional international order with the United Nations as its core. The questions which should guide us are: how can we restore trust? How can we ensure that the rules we all agreed on are respected? And do we have the right structures to address the challenges of the present and the future? And 3 short points on this. First, we should implement the Pact of the Future and put a strong focus on UN reform. In the pact that Namibia and Germany had the honor to facilitate, our heads of state and governance recognized that our deeply interconnected challenges can only be addressed collectively and pledged to uphold international law and the Charter's principles. And therefore, within the UN80 process, we should place a strong focus on structural changes that make the UN fit for purpose and ensure these goals. Secondly, let us learn from the many successes of the United Nations and build on what has worked well. I would just like to mention 2 short things. In many, many countries, the UN has helped to provide accountability and made a lasting contribution to peace and stability. And some former recipients of UN stabilization efforts now share these experiences with others. Just by way of example, and I would like to commend these countries. We are delighted that Sierra Leone just concluded a successful non-permanent membership on the Security Council, and we are looking forward to Liberia's term on the Council. And as I chair the Peacebuilding Commission and had the honor to chair it, I would like to underline that many countries are actively engaging with the PBC to support each other, share national prevention strategies, and showcase how they stabilized their own countries. We do have the instruments that we need. And thirdly, let us show solidarity with those in need. And the UN is at the forefront of this, in humanitarian assistance, as well as in peace and security. And our efforts in Haiti underscore this. Where common will prevails, bold action can be taken, as the Security Council decision establishing the gang suppression force shows, and Germany will support this very much. We have committed $46 million to the trust fund. Madam President, Secretary General, colleagues, this organization has been founded on not to further individual causes, but a common interest. Let's work for that. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
Уважаемая госпожа председатель, благодарим генсекретаря за представление приоритетов. Согласны с тем, что он работает во все более сложных условиях. Россия выступает за укрепление центральной роли ООН в мировых делах. Это сегодня подтвердил президент России Владимир Путин на встрече с послами. На встрече с послами. С послами. With ambassadors. А также изложил видение, как достигать всеобъемлющей безопасности в мире. Но сегодня я хотел бы прокомментировать несколько моментов в отношении работы секретариата. Первое. Важно не допускать двойные стандарты и селективный подход в оценках секретариата происходящим событиям. Сожалеем, что таковые имели место в прошедшем году в отношении кризисов на Украине, секторе Газа, в Иране, на Ближнем Востоке, в Венесуэле, Судане. Второе. Необходимо бороться с произволом крупных доноров, которые навязывают не пользующиеся консенсусом функции и мандаты. Поскольку недостаточно прогресса в географической представленности, секретариат выходит за пределы своих полномочий и теряет беспристрастность. А это главная ценность ООН и залог его беспристрастности и легитимности. Только с ним можно активно участвовать в регулировании конфликтов, который является одним из главных задач секретариата. Третье. Конечно, ООН не может функционировать без ресурсов. Конечно, взносы необходимо выплачивать вовремя. Однако при формировании бюджетных предложений мы призываем более тесно консультироваться с делегациями, чтобы представлять добротную основу для консенсуса. Госпожа председатель, в отношении лимитов по минутам, конечно, хорошо, когда они прерывают оскорбления непрофессиональных дипломатов. Но вы сами призывали вести диалог, а без диалога не спасти ООН.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tajikistan, followed by China and Poland.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, let me thank the Secretary General for his comprehensive briefing on his priorities and assure him of our support. Madam President, despite some progress, we cannot ignore the wider reality. With only 5 years left until 2030, the world is off track. Poverty and inequality are rising, conflicts are becoming more protracted, humanitarian systems are overstretched, and climate impacts are accelerating faster than our collective response. These are not failures of ambition, these are failures of implementation and solidarity. If we are serious about restoring trust in multilateralism, our priorities must be matched by our actions. Allow me to highlight 4 key points in this regard. First, financing for development. We must accelerate reform of the international financial architecture, advance debt relief, and scale up investment in SDGs. Without predictable and adequate financing, our commitment will remain unfulfilled. Second, prevention and resilience. We must place prevention at the center of our work, preventing conflict, climate catastrophes, and humanitarian crises through early action, risk reduction, and strengthened national capacities. Third, technology and digital transformation. We must ensure that innovation serves development and human dignity. We welcome efforts to implement the Global Digital Compact and to harness technology, including AI, in ways that reduce rather than widen global divides. Fourth, water as a strategic priority. Water lies at the heart of climate resilience, food and energy security, health and sustainable development. The pathway to the 2026 UN Water Conference offers a concrete opportunity to move from commitments to delivery. Later this month, a high-level prep meeting in Dakar will launch this process. It will be followed by a high-level event in New York on the 19th of March 2026, marking World Water Day. And from 25th to 28th May 2026, Tajikistan will host in Dushanbe the fourth high-level International Conference on Water Action Decade. This conference will be an important milestone of the Dushanbe water process in 2026 and a major substantive contribution to the UN 2026 Water Conference. From Dakar to New York, from Dushanbe to UAE, this sequence is designed not for statements, but for delivery and bringing forward solutions, mobilizing partnerships. Madam President, the Pact for the Future, the UN 80 initiatives, our collective commitments will only matter if they change realities.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tajikistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
中方感谢古特雷斯秘书长所作通报。当今世界变乱交织，联合国面临严峻挑战，国际形势越是复杂，越要维护联合国权威和地位，维护联合国在国际事务中的核心作用。中方高度赞赏古特雷斯秘书长9年来领导联合国取得的成绩，支持秘书长继续完成好各项工作。我愿强调3点：第一，要坚定维护联合国宪章宗旨和原则，主权平等，不干涉内政，和平解决争端，在国际关系中不使用或威胁使用武力等原则，是宪章的根本要义，是处理国际关系的根本遵循，也是国际和平与安全的基石。联合国要坚决捍卫2战胜利成果，维护战后国际秩序，坚决反对单边主义和霸权主义，坚决反对军国主义复燃。第二，要平衡推进3大支柱，和平与安全、发展、人权3大支柱相辅相成，不可偏废。对于全球南方国家，发展问题更是重中之重，必须始终置于国际议程的核心地位。联合国要增强紧迫感，推动会员国落实2030年可持续发展议程，弥合南北鸿沟、数字鸿沟，实现共同发展、合作共赢。第三，要改革完善全球治理。联合国的价值在于维护全体会员国的共同利益，支持联合国与时俱进、提质增效，推动构建更加公正合理的全球治理体系，是广大会员国的普遍期待，也是中国倡议成立全球治理之友小组的初衷。中方支持秘书长推进联合国80周年改革倡议所作努力，期待改革取得积极成果，凝聚团结合作，为联合国和多边主义注入信心和动力。和平与发展是需要争取的，也是需要维护的。中方愿同各方一道，坚定支持多边主义和以联合国为核心的国际体系，维护和平，促进发展，推动构建人类命运共同体。谢谢主席女士。
I thank the distinguished representative of China. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland, followed by Portugal and Japan.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Secretary General. Aligning with the statement of the European Union, I would like to thank the Secretary General for presenting priorities for 2026. Let me express Poland's appreciation for your service and assurance of full support in the final year of your mandate. And Poland shows this support not in words but in deeds. We have paid our contribution for 2026 in full and in advance. We fully agree with the SGA that at the core of our priorities must be the unwavering commitment to upholding the principles of the UN Charter and international law. In today's complex and volatile global environment, it is essential that the United Nations remains fit for purpose and capable of responding effectively to the emerging challenges. And the UN Charter is our anchor in the sea of chaos, as you described the world of today. In that context, let me quote the last Friday's address by the Pope Leo XIV to the members of the diplomatic corps, and I quote, Efforts are needed to ensure that the United Nations not only reflects the situation of today's world rather than that of the post-war period, but it is also more focused and efficient in pursuing policies aimed at the unity of the human family instead of ideologies. And I agree with that quotation. We echo this call and support the UN reform to renew strong and effective multilateralism firmly rooted in the UN Charter. Peace and security, based on sovereignty and territorial integrity of all member states, brutally attacked by ongoing wars like Russia's aggression against Ukraine, human rights based on universality, and sustainable development based on solidarity with people and planet. All three pillars must remain equally important. Fulfilling ambitious goals needs not only genuine leadership, but also a renewed collective determination among the UN members. This determination will be needed, first and foremost, to undertake responsible actions to advance UN reform. Poland appreciates Secretary General Guterres' UN 80 initiative and the Pact for the Future. It is up to us, the member states, to deliver a positive outcome that will streamline the activities of the UN. Poland strongly supports multilateralism and reaffirms its commitment to the United Nations and to the Secretary General, particularly in the efforts to reform the organization so that it's fit for today's realities and challenges. But finally, this organization is what we member states make it of it. So less hypocrisy and more commitment. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Poland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Portugal.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Secretary General, we thank you for your briefing on priorities for 2026, and we fully support the three principles you have outlined. As you mentioned, this is a demanding moment for the United Nations. The world is marked by prolonged conflicts, by growing inequalities, by the climate emergency, and by rapidly evolving technological challenges. But it is also a moment of responsibility, a moment to translate bold commitments into action and to choose cooperation over fragmentation. Mr. Secretary General, as you enter the final year of your mandate, Portugal wishes to express its deep appreciation for your principled, courageous, and steadfast leadership, a leadership grounded in the UN Charter, in international law, and in a strong commitment to multilateralism, even when it is under severe strain. The report on the work of the UN in 2025 reflects an organization under pressure, but also an organization that continues to delivering life-saving humanitarian assistance, supporting mediation and peace-building efforts, defending human rights, and advancing concrete reforms to strengthen the UN's effectiveness, including in the areas of digital governance and the responsible use of AI. Looking ahead to 2026, the priority should be implementation, turning agreed frameworks into results, strengthening prevention and peace building, adapting peace operations to today's realities, working towards charter-based and sustainable peace in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, and around the world. Mr. Secretary General, your drive for reforms reflected in the UN 80 process is therefore particularly important, and we need to ensure that the UN is fit for purpose in a rapidly changing world. And this should also ensure that our institutions reflect today's world and not the world of 1945. None of these priorities can be achieved without a UN that is adequately resourced to deliver on its mandates. In this regard, my country is proud to be on the honor roll of member states that meet their financial obligations in full and on time. Portugal will continue to support the UN's efforts in a spirit of responsibility, of dialogue, and of service to the wider membership, including if elected to the Security Council next June. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Portugal. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan, followed by Liechtenstein and Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you, Madam President. I also thank Secretary General Guterres for sharing his priorities for 2026. Japan fully supports the SG's vision for a more effective and resilient United Nations during these complex times. The year 2026 is historically significant for Japan, marking 70 years since our admission to the United Nations in 1956. Over these decades, Japan has consistently demonstrated its unwavering commitment to the UN and adhere to the principles of the UN Charter, evolving into a proactive contributor to international peace, security, and prosperity. As we celebrate this milestone amidst global uncertainty, we reaffirm our consistent and robust determination to sustain the international order based on the rule of law and support the UN works. The UN faces unprecedented challenges. I commend Secretary General Guterres for his endeavor, particularly through the UN-80 initiative. UN reform cannot be realized without firmest commitment and concrete actions taken by the whole UN system. Japan will actively engage in further works to find a way forward. Madam President, for the UN to remain relevant in today's dire geopolitical reality, Japan continues to advocate for urgent reform of the Security Council. The Council must be transformed through expanding its permanent and non-permanent categories, and we must move forward text-based negotiations as soon as possible. Equally important is our progress toward the 2030 Agenda. Japan will accelerate its efforts to achieve SDGs, including through the lens of human security. To ensure no one is left behind, stronger cooperation is necessary in traditional areas such as poverty and health, as well as new challenges including AI and digital technologies, while tackling issues related to financing for development. Lastly, as we approach the selection of the next Secretary General, its process must be conducted with the highest level of transparency, inclusivity, and predictability to ensure broad support to the next leader in this challenging time. Japan is ready to work with all member states and the Secretary General to make 2026 a year of decisive action and renewed hope. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein.
And we want to thank the SG for his briefing and wish him all the best as he enters the final year of service to our organization. We're also grateful that he has found positive words on a few things, and I want to echo in particular his words that this disruption can be a force of construction. I do believe, and I hope that we can look at the moment that we find ourselves as a moment of opportunity and of resilience. And that is necessary because, as you have said yesterday, Madam President, more than ever, this is a make it or break it moment for our organization. And I just want to offer comments on two topics discussed this morning. The first is UN-80. We were certainly pleased to see that we were able to adopt the budget after much difficulty at the end of 2025 as a positive contribution on the discussions under work stream 1. This, of course, is not a reason to congratulate ourselves. This is simply what we need to do to keep the organization going. And of course, it is not a decision that has solved the liquidity crisis. We are confident that work stream 2 is on a good track. We have a clear calendar and a time frame, and we look forward to concrete results that will have a direct impact on the future work of this organization, but it will also take time of the results of these outcomes to play out, which is why it's so important that we now turn to work stream 3 in more detail to examine the potential structural changes to the UN system, which is what will make a difference in the long term and which we need in order to convince our political leaderships that they continue to make the investment that we see in this organization. We share the concern that you've expressed, Secretary General, concerning the state of international law. The United Nations, more than anything else, stands for the rule of law, the importance of international law, and the fact that it is agreed rules that govern international relations. Violations of Article 2.4 in particular are proliferating, and no state should get a free pass in the violation of the UN Charter. We certainly look for your leadership in calling out such violations, but it is in fact our collective responsibility of member states to continue referencing the importance of international law in order to keep this as the foundation of our organization. I thank you so much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kyrgyzstan, followed by Egypt and Morocco.
Madam President, we thank the Secretary General for his briefing and for outlining his priorities for 2026. Kyrgyzstan supports a strong, effective and action-oriented United Nations capable of responding for today's complex and interlinked global challenges. As my President emphasized in his statement at the 18th session of the United Nations General Assembly, the world is experiencing a profound crisis of trust in international relations, accompanied by growing geopolitical tensions, conflicts, and fragmentation. In this context, the role of United Nations as the central platform for dialogue and collective decision-making is more important than ever. Kyrgyzstan firmly believes that multilateralism based on the UN Charter, respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference in internal affairs must remain the cornerstone of international relations. There can be no sustainable peace or development without strict adherence to international law and without equal respect for all states, large and small. Peace and security remain at the top of our shared agenda. Kyrgyzstan consistently advocates for the peaceful resolution of conflicts through dialogue and diplomacy. Kyrgyzstan, together with Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, has jointly presented a draft resolution on the peaceful settlement of border disputes. We count on the support of the member states. We thank all delegations for their attention to the remarkable progress achieved in Central Asian countries in peacefully resolving long-standing border disputes, which was also highlighted during the meeting of Peacebuilding Commission last December. Mr. Secretary General, Kyrgyzstan also aligns itself with your emphasis on reforming and strengthening the UN system and the work under the UN-80 initiative. Allow me gently recall the importance of fairness and inclusivity in the work of the Security Council. We all speak about justice, equality, and the importance of hearing the voices of all states, including small and developing. Yes, these principles must be reflected in practice, especially in the functioning of the Council. The credibility and effectiveness of the Council depend on its ability to reflect the diversity of UN members. Countries that have never had opportunity to serve on the Council should be given a fair chance to contribute to its work, and the voices of small and developing states must be heard. Madam President, the future of United Nations depends on our collective political will to strengthen unity, restore trust, and act responsibly for the benefit of present and future generations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kyrgyzstan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Secretary General, for the inspiring statement. Egypt appreciates your leadership. We align ourselves with the statements delivered by the G77 in China and the African Group. The UN system is predicated on the conviction that multilateralism provides a foundation for global stability and that the reliance on the protection provided by international law would prevail over that sought through the use of force. Violations of international law, including by permanent members of the Security Council, weaken the authority of the Charter and threaten the very foundation of multilateralism. Yet, despite this bleak outlook, I want to offer a note of cautious optimism. This moment of crisis and uncertainty is an opportunity for middle powers and small states to assume leadership in defending international law and sustaining multilateral diplomacy. Through coalition building, norm setting, and principled engagement within the UN, these stakeholders can and should demonstrate that multilateralism does not depend solely on the will, whim, or restraint of the most powerful. In this connection, The UN is indeed empowered with a set of tools to mediate, manage and resolve conflict, build and sustain peace, as well as advance economic and social development and protect human rights. The future of the UN will be shaped by the collective resolve of its broader membership to sharpen and modernize the existing tools and to introduce new ones that are capable of addressing the emerging challenges and opportunities. The successful adoption of the Pact for the Future in 2024 offered a glimpse of hope in this respect. On the outlook for the organization in 2026, I wish to underscore the following. 2025 has just concluded with adopting a regular budget that is significantly lower than last year's. This comes in response to the UN 80 initiative to strengthen effectiveness, coordination, and accountability across the UN system. The majority of member states have bought into this effort with the understanding that a leaner UN will be more capable of delivering mandates and enhancing impact. We must be mindful not to practically reduce this process into a mere cost-cutting exercise. As we further engage on the three work streams of the UN 80 initiative, we need to be more vigilant, responsible, and forward-looking. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Egypt. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco, followed by France and Saudi Arabia.
Merci Madame la Présidente. J'ai l'honneur de lire cette déclaration au nom de mon ambassadeur qui regrette de ne pas pouvoir la prononcer en raison de sa présidence d'une réunion parallèle. Monsieur le secrétaire général, le Royaume du Maroc voudrait vous exprimer ses sincères félicitations pour l'exposé exhaustif que vous avez bien voulu décliner devant nous ce matin. L'année 2026 doit être celle de la consolidation de l'action collective et du renforcement effectif du multilatéralisme face aux défis multiples et successifs que connaît notre monde. Elle doit marquer le passage des engagements pris, notamment lors des grandes réunions de 2025, aux résultats concrets et mesurables sur le terrain, et soutenir les initiatives qui nous rapprochent et nous unissent. À cet égard, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, votre leadership et votre vision lucide seront déterminants pour guider nos efforts communs en 2026. Dans cet esprit, je voudrais souligner 5 points. Premièrement, le Maroc soutient vos efforts visant à renforcer l'efficacité, la cohérence et la capacité d'action de l'organisation, notamment ceux portés par votre initiative ONU 80. 2. Face aux nouvelles réalités et aux défis évolutifs auxquels sont confrontées les opérations de maintien de la paix, le Maroc, en tant que pays contributeur de troupes traditionnelles et majeures, réaffirme le rôle central des opérations de maintien de la paix de l'ONU et attend avec intérêt les résultats de l'examen en cours de l'ensemble des opérations de paix. 3. Dans un environnement de tension et de course à l'armement, la conférence d'examen du TNP en 2026 sera un moment de vérité. Le Maroc soutient une approche équilibrée renforçant les 3 piliers du traité et surtout la confiance entre États parties, car sans confiance, aucun régime de sécurité collective ne tient. 4. Ma délégation souligne l'importance d'une gouvernance responsable de l'intelligence artificielle afin d'en maîtriser les risques et de réduire les fractures numériques. Enfin, mon pays soutient pleinement le rôle moteur des jeunes qui contribuent activement au développement durable, au rapprochement des sociétés et au renforcement de la paix. Pour conclure, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, le Maroc reste engagé pour une organisation plus crédible, plus efficace et surtout capable de délivrer ses mandats. Je vous remercie.
I thank the distinguished representative of Morocco. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of France.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je remercie tout d'abord Monsieur le Secrétaire général pour son exposé, dont la France partage l'inspiration, les constats et les conclusions. L'inspiration, c'est la pérennité de la charte et des buts en vue desquels elle a été adoptée il y a 80 ans. Ces buts correspondent à des aspirations universelles. Aspiration à un monde en paix, respectueux de la souveraineté des États, assurant à chacun la jouissance des droits fondamentaux de la personne humaine et garantissant les conditions écologiques, économiques et sociales adéquates. Aspiration à un monde où la force le cède au droit, où la compétition le cède à la coopération quand il s'agit de résoudre les questions fondamentales de notre temps. Les constats que vous faites, nous les partageons. Comme vous, nous constatons que la réalisation des buts de la Charte se trouve compromise quand prévalent la division et l'esprit de défiance. Quand des nations s'affranchissent des normes fondamentales encadrant le recours à la force, méconnaissent les droits fondamentaux de leur population ou s'exonèrent de l'effort collectif. Les Nations unies reposent sur la libre observance par les États des règles qu'ils élaborent ensemble. Il s'agit là d'une responsabilité qui nous oblige devant nos peuples. Appliquons le pacte pour l'avenir, atteignons les objectifs du développement durable. Enfin, les conclusions que vous tirez et les perspectives que vous tracez pour l'avenir recueillent notre acquiescement et notre soutien. Nous voulons une ONU forte et respectée, autant qu'efficace et engagée. Engagée pour la paix, le soulagement humanitaire, les droits de l'homme et le développement durable. Financée comme elle le doit, chacun payant à temps son dû. Nous soutenons la réforme que vous avez entreprise pour tenir compte de la nécessité sans transiger sur l'idéal. ONU 80 a connu un commencement de mise en œuvre avec l'adoption du budget par consensus en fin d'année dernière. Elle doit se poursuivre à l'échelle de tout le système des Nations unies. Ce système, fruit d'une longue sédimentation, a besoin d'une rationalisation. À l'heure où le manque de ressources oblige, par exemple, à hiérarchiser les souffrances humaines au nom de la priorisation des besoins humanitaires, il ne serait pas acceptable que les ressources ne soient pas employées au maximum de leur utilité. C'est aussi la condition pour que l'ONU soit en mesure de répondre aux défis contemporains, régulation du numérique et de l'intelligence artificielle, changement climatique, lutte contre le terrorisme ou le crime organisé. Monsieur le secrétaire général, alors que vous entrez dans la dernière année de votre mandat, la fermeté de vos convictions, la lucidité de vos constats et la résolution de vos actions continuent d'être inentamées et d'appeler de la part de la France.
I thank the distinguished representative of France. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia, followed by Singapore and Tunisia.
السيد الرئيس مع الأمين العام، السيدات والسادة، بداية نرحب بعقد هذا الاجتماع ونعرب عن شكرنا الجزيل لمعالي الأمين العام على تقريره الشامل وعلى إحاطته القيمة بشأن أولوياته للعام 2026. كما نثمن جهودكم المخلصة خلال السنوات السابقة ونقدر قيادتكم الحكيمة في هذه المرحلة الحاسمة من عمل الأمم المتحدة والتي تأتي في لحظة تاريخية في ظل ذكراها 80. السيد الرئيس، تكتسب هذه الدورة أهمية خاصة إذ تتزامن مع إطلاق مبادرة الأمم المتحدة 80 والتي تمثل فرصة مناسبة لتقييم عمل المنظمة وتعزيز قدرتها على الاستجابة للتحديات الدولية المتسارعة. فالعالم اليوم يواجه تحديات غير مسبوقة للسلم والأمن الدوليين، بما في ذلك النزاعات الممتدة والتوترات الجيوسياسية والتي تهدد الاستقرار الإقليمي والعالمي. وهذه الحقائق تؤكد الحاجة إلى منظمة أممية مرنة وفعالة وقادرة على اتخاذ إجراءات فعالة وحاسمة. وفي هذا السياق فإن مبادرة الأمم المتحدة 80 تمثل أداة مهمة لتجديد وتقوية المنظمة وتعزيز قدرتها على الوقاية من النزاعات وعمليات الوساطة. فتعزيز الدبلوماسية الوقائية يظل أساسياً لمعالجة أسباب النزاعات وتقليل المعاناة الإنسانية وتعزيز الأمن والاستقرار على المستويين الإقليمي والعالمي. كما نود التأكيد على أهمية أن تظل هذه المبادرة قائمة على الشفافية والشمولية وبناء التوافق تقودها الدول الأعضاء، بما يضمن تعزيز العمل متعدد الأطراف وتحسين كفاءة المنظمة. ختاماً، السيد الرئيس، السيدات والسادة، تجدد بلادي دعمها لمعالي الأمين العام ونثمن حرصه على استمرار جهود الأمم المتحدة لتكون منظمة فعالة وقوية وقادرة على حماية السلم والأمن الدوليين وتحقيق الاستقرار والتنمية المستدامة لشعوب العالم. وشكراً.
I thank the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I thank the Secretary General for his remarks and for his steadfast leadership. We welcome the priorities that he has outlined for the year ahead, and we recognize and appreciate the Secretary General's commitment to keep working and keep pushing with urgency and determination. Madam President, a large majority of members of this Assembly, members of the United Nations, are small states. And for small states like Singapore, the multilateral system, anchored by the United Nations and founded on the principles of the UN Charter and international law, is indispensable for peace and security. In a world of chaos and conflict, every member state has a responsibility to stand up for international law and defend the principles of the UN Charter. We cannot allow violations of international law to become normal or to be normalized. As member states, we all also have a collective responsibility to work together to build understanding, to bridge our differences based on mutual respect and mutual trust. Singapore stands ready to work with all member states to strengthen the role of the United Nations and to defend multilateralism. Madam President, please allow me to make a few points. First, we need to accelerate reform and deliver results. We have made a good start with UN80, but we need to press on with this process. Just 2 weeks ago, we adopted a consensus budget for 2026 that led to significant reductions in the resource and staffing requirements, while also seeking to streamline and enhance our organization's efficiency. This is a concrete demonstration that the UN can adapt to challenges and deliver results. In this context, we underline our readiness to work with all member states to continue the UN80 process in a way that is beneficial to all of us collectively. Second, we need to accelerate the implementation of what we have already agreed, in particular the Sustainable Development Goals and the Pact of the Future. The Pact of the Future provides a very clear blueprint to make the UN future ready and to address the challenges posed by emerging technologies and to harness its potential in order to reduce inequalities between nations. Thirdly, as an organization, we need to communicate better and communicate differently. We need to make a positive case for multilateralism to people, especially young people around the world. There's far too much cynicism, and this needs to be changed. We look forward to working with you and your team and with all member states. I thank you very much for.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia, followed by Zimbabwe and Paraguay. Tunisia.
Secretary General, Your Excellencies, Tunisia welcomes this briefing and expresses its appreciation to the Secretary General for his continued leadership and for the clarity of the priorities he has outlined. We reaffirm our full support to his wishes and vision for a stronger, more responsive, and more effective United Nations. Tunisia attaches particular importance to the UN80 reform initiative. In this context, we stress the need to safeguard the development pillar of the United Nations. We also reaffirm our unwavering commitment to the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, the respect by all the members of international legitimacy and international law, and the importance of peacekeeping operations and preventive diplomacy, dialogue, and cooperation. The principles of non-aggression, sovereignty, and territorial integrity must remain the cornerstone of international relations instead of colonialism, genocides, and unilateral actions. Tunisia further underlines the urgent need to ensure predictable, adequate, and sustainable financing for the United Nations, as well as enhanced international efforts to finance development in line with national priorities. We reiterate our long-standing call for a comprehensive reform of the Security Council, including the correction of historical injustice through fair and permanent representation of Africa. Tunisia also values the role of the United Nations in supporting developing countries in stolen asset recovery and debt management. Finally, Tunisia expresses its hope that the forthcoming process for the election of a new Secretary General will reflect the organization's commitment to inclusivity and gender equality, and we encourage in this regard the selection of a woman Secretary General. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank the Secretary General for his candid and comprehensive briefing, which was both timely and illuminating. As we approach 2030, the international community stands at a defining crossroads. Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals remains slow and uneven, with reversals in key areas while the financing gap continues to widen. Accelerating implementation of the 2030 Agenda is therefore urgent. In this regard, we stress the importance of honoring all existing commitments, including those proposed under the SDG Stimulus Plan. While member states have committed to mobilizing financing for development through the Compromiso de Sevilla, debt distress continues to constrain the policy space of many developing countries. This underscores the urgent need for meaningful reform of the global financial architecture so that it reflects current realities and responds more equitably to the needs of the Global South. We welcome progress under the UN80 initiative and commend the Secretary General's commitment to transparency through regular reporting. We share the aspiration for a more efficient and responsive United Nations. At the same time, efficiency gains must not come at the expense of core mandates, particularly the development pillar. In this context, we reiterate our concern regarding proposals to phase out agencies that have been central to the development efforts in many countries, including UNAIDS. We also have a collective responsibility to safeguard our planet for present and future generations. The breach of the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold and accelerating sea level rise demand that we move decisively from pledges to action. For many countries, climate mitigation and adaptation are not abstract goals, but matters of food security, livelihoods, and survival. Developed countries must therefore fully honor their climate finance commitments. Finally, we support initiatives to promote universal and equitable access to technology, including emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, and look forward to constructive engagement in the global dialogue on AI governance. As I conclude, Madam President, the challenges before us are interconnected and demand renewed multilateral cooperation and collective resolve. In this context, the Pact for the Future is significant as it offers a pathway to restoring confidence in multilateralism. Working together despite our differences remains our most credible path to shared progress in sustainable development. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Zimbabwe. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Paraguay, followed by Mongolia and Pakistan.
Gracias, Presidenta. El Paraguay agradece al Secretario General por la presentación de su reporte anual y de sus prioridades para el 2026, las cuales orientarán la labor durante este periodo. Los países del sur global, los países en desarrollo sin litoral, como el Paraguay, los pequeños estados insulares y las pequeñas economías, enfrentamos de manera muy particular los desafíos estructurales actuales y crecientes. Las limitaciones de conectividad, las asimetrías en el acceso a mercados, la vulnerabilidad frente a shocks externos y las restricciones para movilizar recursos son grandes. Por ello, reiteramos la necesidad de seguir avanzando hacia un sistema internacional más inclusivo, eficaz y representativo, adecuado a las realidades de los países en desarrollo. Fortalecer la presencia y la voz de estos países en la toma de decisiones no es una cuestión de equidad, sino una cuestión indispensable para la legitimidad y efectividad de las respuestas colectivas a los diferentes desafíos globales. El secretario general Guterres Contamos con su compromiso con la organización y la cual esperamos se vea aún más fortalecida en este último año de su mandato. En un contexto internacional cambiante y complejo, el mundo necesita una ONU robusta, capaz de seguir defendiendo los principios consagrados en los 3 pilares de la Carta, sin necesidad alguna de priorizar ninguna de ellas, tarea para la cual seguimos contando con su conducción hasta el último día. En este contexto, resulta para nosotros fundamental subrayar la relevancia del proceso de selección del secretario general. Este momento constituye una oportunidad histórica para reflejar de manera concreta el compromiso de las Naciones Unidas con la diversidad regional. Paraguay apoya firmemente que el próximo secretario general o secretaria general sea la persona más idónea de América Latina y el Caribe, seleccionada sobre la base del mérito, la integridad y la capacidad de liderazgo mediante un proceso transparente. Por otra parte, secretario general, el Paraguay le felicita por su impulso en la iniciativa ONU 80 y, como lo hemos mencionado en otras oportunidades, pensamos que la reforma para mejorar la eficiencia operativa y reestructurar el sistema de Naciones Unidas para responder de manera más ágil a los desafíos actuales era sumamente necesaria y urgente, independientemente de la situación financiera de la organización. Por último, reiteramos nuestro compromiso con Naciones Unidas y el sistema multilateral. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Paraguay and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mongolia.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, I would like to thank the Secretary General for his steadfast leadership and for sharing his priorities for the year of 2026. My delegation aligns itself with the statement made by Uruguay on the behalf of Group 77 and China. Excellencies, in 2025, during the commemoration of the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, we, member states, have once more realized the importance of standing together and working together to support and strengthen the United Nations, our beacon of hope for global peace and security and development. In this connection, today I would like to make 3 brief points. First, we commend the achievements outlined in the report of the Secretary General on the work of the organization. We see that the recent educational attainments, growth in digital connectivity, and bold climate actions, including support to renewable energy, need to be maintained for accelerating 2030 Agenda's implementation. Likewise, strides toward leaving no one behind, including measures on improving gender equality, youth involvement, development in Africa, and assistance to millions of refugees and displaced people through UN system have been remarkable in the last years. We truly appreciate the tangible results of SG's system-wide strategy on gender parity, which resulted in the achievement of gender parity among senior leadership, resident coordinators, as well as among professional and higher categories. Second, last year, important roadmaps were defined in several fields and sectors, including FFD4, UNOC3, LLDC3, and Second World Social Summit. Thus, we consider that it's important to integrate them well into implementation of the 2030 Agenda and Pact for the Future. Third, we welcome the key priorities and challenges that the Secretary General has identified today, and particularly appreciate concerns about global unrest and appeal to reducing security threats and conflicts. It should be underlined that we wholeheartedly support the Secretary General's UN 80 initiative. We expect that 2026 will be a turning point for the realization of the UN 80 initiative, which is aimed at making UN more agile, integrated, effective, and cost-efficient for the 21st century by reforming its operation, streamlining mandates, restructuring programs to better tackle complex global challenges, including conflict, climate change, and inequality. In support of the SDGs priorities in 2026 and the overall future of the UN, Mongolia reaffirms our commitment to be engaged more constructively in the future discussions and collaboration.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mongolia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan, followed by the Republic of Korea and Panama.
Thank you, President. I would like to commend the Secretary General for his leadership, clarity of vision, and strong commitment to the UN and multilateralism. SG, you have rightly mentioned chaos and complexity of the challenges that confront us. And we agree with you that mutual trust and cooperation are most needed today, and that no one country or a select group can do it alone. Pakistan has supported you throughout, and we will stand by you and continue to strengthen your hands during the last year of your mandate. We appreciate your friendship, dynamism, and availability, as we also saw in your leadership in mobilizing international response to the 2022 floods in Pakistan. SG, we appreciate the principles and priorities that you have outlined and the passion with which you have sought to advance the 3 pillars of the UN. You also refer to the obligations of member states, from payment of contributions to respect for the Charter. And let me add that it is the duty of the member states to support the organization and to carry out its decisions and resolutions, to promote peaceful settlement of disputes and respect international obligations and treaties. You emphasize the need for reform, and we agree that it must strengthen and not weaken the organization, a reform away from status and privilege towards true sovereign equality, away from archaic concepts towards contemporary realities of democracy, representation, and accountability that must underpin global governance. And I concur here with the views expressed by the distinguished representative of Egypt regarding the important role of medium and small states in this regard. And that's why, Secretary General, we have been saying we want reform for all and privileges for none. Cooperative multilateralism through this organization, our United Nations, is the way forward. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Secretary General Guterres for presenting his annual priorities. The Republic of Korea aligns itself with this direction, which is firmly grounded in UN Charter and in multilateralism. Today, multilateralism is under serious threat. Yet we still believe that multilateralism remains irreplaceable in addressing global challenges. Under this backdrop, I'll make 3 points. First, 2026 must shift commitment to implementation. As the Secretary General has emphasized, what the international community does lack is not the arrangement, but delivery. Thus, it is critical to translate our shared commitment into concrete action across the UN's core pillars. This is essential for restoring trust in the UN and multilateralism. We support the Secretary General's emphasis on implementation, follow-up, and result. Second, UN reform is essential for enabling effective implementation. Across the UN United Nations system, delivery shortfalls reflect deeper challenges: fragmentation, inefficiencies, and coordination constraints. My delegation welcomes the Secretary General's UN AD initiative as a practical effort for the UN to adapt and perform more effectively in a rapidly changing environment. Third, the leadership of the Secretary General is more critical than ever. Korea's experience on the Security Council reaffirmed that stability cannot endure without the consistent application of global norms and the rule of law. During this year of uncertainty, the Secretary General's moral authority and judgment are indispensable in defending the Charter and protecting multilateralism. In this context, we underscore that the significance of preserving the legitimacy, continuity, and effectiveness of the leadership, including a transparent and inclusive process for the selection of the next Secretary General. In closing, as my president stressed in this hall last September, Korea's experience over the past 80 years demonstrates that UN can deliver peace and prosperity, even as crises proliferate. Republic of Korea looks forward to working with all member states to ensure the UN is people purpose for all over its next 80 years and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Panama, followed by Trinidad and Tobago and Mexico.
Señora Presidenta, señor Secretario General, Excelencias, Panamá agradece la presentación del informe anual del Secretario General 2025 y la exposición de sus prioridades para 2026. Mi delegación se adhiere a las declaraciones realizadas por el G77 y por el Grupo de Ideas Afines Países de Renta Media y agradece al Secretario General por su siempre atinada y responsable gestión. Reconocemos el valor de su informe como una guía esencial que nos recuerda que la dignidad humana debe permanecer en el centro de la acción colectiva de esta organización. En un momento en que resurgen tensiones geopolíticas, resulta esencial fortalecer los mecanismos multilaterales de diálogo, cooperación y prevención de conflictos. Panamá reitera que la paz y la estabilidad internacionales solo pueden sostenerse mediante el pleno respeto de los principios consagrados en la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Panamá coincide con el Secretario General en el fortalecimiento del multilateralismo es indispensable para responder a un entorno internacional marcado por crecientes tensiones, desigualdades persistentes y desafíos estructurales aún no resueltos. En este contexto, reafirmamos la centralidad de las Naciones Unidas como foro legítimo para promover el desarrollo sostenible, la cooperación internacional, el respeto a los derechos humanos y el derecho internacional. Como país marítimo rodeado por dos mares unidos por su canal, Panamá considera particularmente relevante lo señalado en el informe sobre la crisis hídrica mundial que afecta a más de 4.000 millones de personas. Para Panamá la seguridad hídrica trasciende lo ambiental y conecta directamente la salud, la economía, la logística, el ambiente y la cohesión social. En ese sentido, el Canal de Panamá, neutral, seguro y operado por panameños, cuya operación depende del uso responsable de agua fresca, continúa prestando servicios esenciales a la logística internacional y al comercio global. Señora Presidenta, la reforma de las Naciones Unidas y sus órganos, así como de la arquitectura financiera internacional, son fundamentales para avanzar hacia un sistema más equitativo e inclusivo. Panamá reafirma su firme apoyo a las Naciones Unidas y como hub regional del sistema, su disposición a seguir contribuyendo activamente al trabajo de la organización en beneficio de las generaciones presentes y futuras. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Panama. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Madam President. Trinidad and Tobago wishes to thank the Secretary General for his comprehensive briefing and for outlining the organization's priorities for 2026. It would also seem remiss of me not to also acknowledge you as President of this august body, the General Assembly, for your insightful presentation yesterday. Trinidad and Tobago fully supports the priorities identified, particularly the urgent need to accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Progress remains far too slow, and the international community must redouble its efforts to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. In this regard, Trinidad and Tobago reiterates its strong support for reform of the global financial architecture to ensure a more equitable, responsive, and development-oriented system. My delegation also acknowledges the Pact for the Future and the UN 80 process and commends the co-chairs Jamaica and New Zealand of the informal ad hoc working group for their stewardship. We remain ready to support reforms aimed at strengthening this organization one of the most consequential multilateral institutions, to ensure that the United Nations is more agile and fit for purpose to respond effectively to the present and future global challenges. Within the United Nations system, Trinidad and Tobago will continue to advance the agendas related to citizen security, the empowerment of women and girls, AI governance, food and energy security, sustainable development, and environmental resilience, as these issues remain central to our national priorities. In taking this opportunity to thank the Secretary General for his leadership and foresight as his term comes to a close, Trinidad and Tobago underscores the importance of a transparent, inclusive, and merit-based selection process that redounds in the appointment of the most suitable candidate for this critically important role of the next Secretary General at this pivotal moment. As we navigate an increasingly complex global landscape, my delegation stands ready to work constructively with all member states to advance our shared objectives and to strengthen this indispensable organization. We look forward to continued collaboration in shaping a more stable, fair, and sustainable world. I thank you, Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Trinidad and Tobago. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico, followed by Switzerland and Ukraine.
Excelencias, yo quisiera simplemente agradecer y felicitar al secretario general por haberse apartado un tanto del formato tradicional de estos informes y estas presentaciones de planes para el año en curso, para en cambio enfocarse en lo que constituyen los graves problemas que enfrenta el mundo en estos días. Creo que no estamos en un momento para respuestas convencionales, sino para acciones inusitadas, dada la gravedad de la situación internacional. Ojalá que la membresía de las Naciones Unidas, que todos quienes estamos representados en esta institución, hagamos eco y respondamos de manera acorde con la gravedad de los problemas que el secretario general sintetizó esta mañana. En cuanto a México, desde luego reafirmamos nuestro compromiso inquebrantable con el multilateralismo y con las Naciones Unidas. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Et j'aimerais tout d'abord vous remercier, vous, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, de votre leadership toujours orienté aux principes de la Charte et de la présentation de vos priorités de cette année. Et je voudrais surtout vous souhaiter pour cette dernière année qui sera riche en défis, santé et succès. Vous pouvez compter sur le soutien de mon pays, la Suisse, jusqu'au dernier jour de votre mandat. Et je voudrais aussi, au nom de la Suisse, exprimer notre reconnaissance à l'ensemble du personnel des Nations Unies. Ce fut une année difficile, mais leur travail donne de l'espoir. Ils réaffirment la confiance et la résilience face à des situations souvent plus difficiles que jamais. La Suisse rend hommage à leur courage, leur professionnalisme et leur engagement. Madame la Présidente, dans le contexte géopolitique actuel profondément polarisé et marqué par une remise en cause des règles communes, nous l'avons entendu ce matin, 3 priorités seront au cœur de l'engagement de la Suisse. Premièrement, le respect du droit international et de l'état de droit. Dans un monde interconnecté, le droit international doit rester la boussole et le fondement des interactions entre États, du trafic aérien à la gouvernance numérique, au commerce, mais surtout aussi quant à la coopération pacifique. La Charte des Nations Unies demeure notre cadre commun. Elle n'est pas une option, mais une obligation. Elle doit être respectée dans son intégralité. Le pick and choose n'est ni admissible ni soutenable et comporte des risques majeurs pour la crédibilité et la stabilité de l'ordre international. Et ceci non seulement pour les pays petits ou de taille moyenne comme le mien, mais, l'histoire nous l'apprend, aussi pour toutes les puissances, grandes soient-elles. Il nous faut donc un retour clair et un engagement fort en faveur des principes ainsi que des conséquences crédibles pour celles et ceux qui les violent. Deuxièmement, la réforme et le renforcement des Nations Unies, notamment à travers l'initiative ONU 80. La Suisse soutient depuis toujours un système onusien fort, efficace et efficient. Nous saluons votre initiative de réforme ONU 80, Monsieur le Secrétaire général, qui offre une occasion importante de façonner un multilatéralisme tourné vers l'avenir. Les réformes sont en effet nécessaires, elles doivent réduire la complexité, éviter les duplications et recentrer les entités afin de permettre à l'ONU de remplir pleinement ses mandats, de garantir des chaînes décisionnelles plus courtes et une meilleure utilisation des ressources et un impact renforcé sur le terrain. Vous pouvez donc compter sur notre soutien à la réforme. Troisièmement, la nécessité d'une coopération multilatérale transparente, inclusive et fondée sur la confiance. Les défis auxquels nous faisons face ne peuvent être résolus que collectivement. Nos populations attendent des résultats concrets. Elles attendent de nous que nous soyons à la hauteur de la promesse inscrite dès les premiers mots de la Charte. Et vous pouvez compter sur nous pour vous soutenir dans tous ces efforts. Je vous remercie.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine, followed by Namibia, and the observer of the International Organization of la Francophonie.
Madam President, aligning with the statement of the European Union, I would like to thank the Secretary General, António Guterres, for your passionate speech and your priorities of the work that you have presented. I would also like to reject criticism of SG and the UN Secretariat that we just heard from the Russian delegation, including accusations of alleged bias. Such claims are absurd. There is only one truth, even if some do not like it. Secretary General, you have mentioned the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. It still remains the biggest challenge to international peace and security. We commend your constant condemnation of the atrocities that Russia keeps committing against the civilian population in Ukraine, especially these days when Russian missiles and drones have caused blackouts, leaving millions of Ukrainians without electricity, without water, without heat, under the freezing temperatures below 15 degrees Celsius. As the Security Council remains blocked by Russia cynically abusing its veto right, the role of the Secretary General becomes crucial in addressing the bloodiest war on the European continent since 1945. Wars of condemnation matter, but they are not sufficient. We need new actions, we need new deeds, we need new initiatives, even if such engagement is unwelcome to one of the parties. The UN cannot be just an observer, especially now when the mediation efforts of the United States of America are advancing. Secretary General Guterres has already demonstrated strong leadership, launching the Black Sea Grain Initiative to free Ukrainian ports from Russian Navy blockade and allowing us to export Ukrainian wheat to the global south to ensure food security and fight hunger. That was a truly courageous step. Now we would like to encourage you to continue this assertive approach and start new initiatives that would help us put an end to this barbaric Russian war. We would hope and we would welcome your leading role in returning to Ukraine our children forcefully abducted by Russia. The respective resolution was passed by this Assembly last month, and it has provided you with a strong mandate to act. It is in this spirit that we wish you that this final year of your office will be the most successful one and will leave a lasting mark on history. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. Before giving the floor to Namibia, I've seen India. If there's any other member state who wish to speak, please press the button now. Otherwise, we would come as a final speaker to the observer before I give the floor again to the Secretary General. So I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia, followed by India.
Thank you, Madam President. Namibia would like to thank the Secretary General for his leadership and for his timely briefing on the work of the organization and commits to cooperate with him as he implements his priorities during his last year in office. Being the child of international solidarity midwifed by the United Nations, Namibia subscribes to the principles of multilateralism as enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and respect for international law. As our world grapples with interlocking global challenges, including heightened geopolitical tensions and pressing social and environmental issues, we are witnessing the expansion of very serious forms of types of unilateral actions which threaten the very existence of the United Nations. These actions violate the principles of sovereignty, sovereign equality, non-intervention, non-interference in internal affairs, and peaceful settlement of disputes. In order for the United Nations to remain fit for purpose, our focus should be on the UN 80 initiative to strengthen the United Nations system and to make it more strategic and responsive to global challenges as stipulated in the Pact for the Future. This should call for more accountability and collaboration in an integrated manner through the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation Frameworks in supporting developing countries to achieve the 2030 agenda and address current and new emerging challenges to sustainable development through supporting national development priorities and policies. The UN reform should be geared towards addressing the needs of developing countries, including reforming the international financial architecture to make it more equitable, ensuring access to concessional funding and development to climate financing, and supporting regional frameworks for peace and security, amongst others. Let us be reminded that the UN remains the only suitable platform with a legitimate authority to collective action, and Namibia reiterates its unwavering commitment to the principles of the UN Charter and to the rules-based international order rooted in the principles of sovereign equality of states. Finally, Namibia aligns itself with the statements delivered by groups to which it belongs. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Namibia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of India, followed by the observer of the International Organization of La Francophonie, and by this, the speaking list is closed.
Madam President, Secretary General, and Excellencies, India thanks the Secretary General for outlining his priorities for the year. India particularly welcomes his commitment to make every day of 2026 count. As a member state that is firmly committed to multilateralism with United Nations at its core, India underscores that we stand fully ready to work alongside the Secretary General and his team as he pursues the 2026 vision. 2026 is a critical year for the United Nations. It faces several key challenges. The most significant one is the questions related to UN's efficacy, legitimacy, and credibility. These stem from the expectations of the world citizenry to deliver on each of the three key functions of the UN. The inability to purposefully intervene on UN's critical functions needs to be addressed on priority. Reformed multilateralism is essential to addressing the existing gaps. This is not a choice anymore. It is an imperative. The UN 80 initiative is a welcome step in this regard. India has pledged its full support and cooperation to this initiative. Member states must make full use of this opportunity. The UN membership must be guided by an ambitious vision on this front. It must not be limited to budgetary and financial aspects alone. Security Council reform is central to such vision. UNSC must reflect contemporary geopolitical realities. Both permanent and non-permanent categories must be expanded. These timely changes are vital to making the UN fit for purpose and equip this organization to respond meaningfully to present and future challenges. This calls for member states coming together with a joint sense of purpose to work towards the larger good of humanity. Clearly, there is a need for member states to rise beyond their narrow considerations in order to achieve this. India once again reiterates its full readiness to contribute to this endeavor. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of India. I now give the floor as the final speaker to the observer of the International Organization of la Francophonie.
Madame la Présidente, nous remercions le secrétaire général pour l'exposé de ses priorités qui intervient à un moment d'inflexion sans précédent pour les peuples du monde. L'année 2025 aura été une saison d'incertitude et le rapport du secrétaire général en dresse un constat aussi lucide qu'alarmant. Les valeurs partagées de dialogue et de respect du droit international n'ont jamais été aussi fragilisées et menacées. Ce contexte anxiogène fait redouter un basculement vers le chaos et interpelle la conscience universelle pour l'exigence et l'urgence d'un sursaut de ressaisissement et de réappropriation des valeurs qui fondent la Charte des Nations Unies. Il est évident qu'il n'y a pas d'alternative crédible au multilatéralisme. Ensemble, nous avons d'inestimables atouts pour saisir les opportunités et relever les défis qui se dressent à l'humanité, qu'il s'agisse de menaces sécuritaires, de périls humanitaires ou climatiques, ou encore d'enjeux énergétiques, de développement durable ou de prospérité partagée. Nous devons sans plus tarder renouer avec l'esprit de coopération et de solidarité pour un renouveau du multilatéralisme dans le cadre d'une organisation des Nations Unies ancrée dans son temps, ajustée à ses ressources et résolument tournée vers les peuples du monde. Les Nations Unies pourront compter sur le partenariat avec l'Organisation internationale de la francophonie dans la mise en œuvre des priorités énoncées par le secrétaire général. Notre cadre de coopération actualisé au mois de septembre 2025 en sera une légitime boussole, notamment dans les domaines où notre action requiert une synergie. Dans cette dynamique, nous poursuivons notre accompagnement au processus politique dans les pays francophones et notre assistance technique aux États en transition ainsi que notre appui à la contextualisation des opérations de paix. Nous serons mobilisés dans la réponse à l'urgence climatique et environnementale. Madame la Présidente, notre engagement repose sur la ferme conviction que le dialogue est plus équitable et plus productif lorsqu'il est inclusif. Le multilinguisme, en tant que vecteur d'inclusion et d'intercompréhension, se révèle à cet égard comme un pont entre les nations, un moyen de réduire les malentendus qui sédimentent les tensions géopolitiques et les murs de fragmentation. L'OIF se tiendra comme partenaire de solutions pour répondre aux défis rencontrés dans la mise en œuvre du régime linguistique et de diversité culturelle des Nations Unies. L'OIF sera également engagé à la préparation opérationnelle des contingents chargés de rétablir la paix civile en Haïti.
Merci beaucoup. I thank the distinguished representative of the observer of the International Organization of la Francophonie. I now invite the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency António Guterres, to provide his observation on the interventions made by delegations.
Madam President, I'll be very brief to respect also the time allocated until the end of the session. To say, first of all, that I enormously appreciate the importance and the richness of this debate, from which I hope I will be able to extract safe guidance for my future action. On the other hand, I wanted to sincerely thank several of the observations by different delegations in support of what I'm trying to do. And to say in full humility that my only objective is to fulfill my duty to the UN, my duty to its members and their peoples. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these clear last words. By this, I resume the 70th plenary meeting. And we will, no, I'm sorry, by this, the informal meeting of the plenary is now concluded. I thank to all of you sticking to the time, and I thank for the understanding for the microphone cutoffs. But by this, we could ensure that really everybody could speak within the 3 hours who wished to speak in a full room. And by closing now the informal meeting, we will resume to the 70th plenary meeting, which will be held at 3 p.m. in this hall. The informal meeting is adjourned. Have a good lunch break.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.